I'd be really curious to hear some of the things, the branding lessons that you learned from the company that you worked with that maybe some other law firms could benefit from.
So one of the biggest things was before I started that journey, I operated from a place of you show up as a professional, you keep the act as what one would expect as a lawyer to act and dress the part and speak the speak and all of that. And what that organization allowed me to do was break down some of that a little bit and become a little bit vulnerable as we dug into like the why, like who am I talking to, why am I doing the work, why is it important to me. And as we started to do that work, I'm twice divorced. That was the hardest thing I've ever gone through. The shame, the guilt, like there was so much emotional attachment to that I kept buried because I thought it was unprofessional to talk about it. So the process of building this brand was that if I want to build a brand that people connect with, I actually have to share my story. I have to talk about the thing that's really, really hard for me to talk about in public, and because that's what people connect with. And so as I started putting power to those words and speaking them, I started to get really comfortable talking about here's the thing that where I was my most broken self, because the people who come through my doors as divorce clients are usually that's where they are in their life. And so using that personal story to connect with people, which I thought would actually reflect as being unprofessional, was the differentiator between someone hiring or not, or calling or not, because I have people all the time reach out and said, I see what you post online. Your story is inspirational. I listened to this podcast where you talked openly about how hard of a time that was, and I thought you had it all together. And I'm like, guess what? I don't. I don't. I'm figuring it out. And you know what? You can too. You can figure out even if you didn't expect that plot twist of a divorce. So it's really using that emotional part of my story to promote and build the business, which I've always kept them so separate for so many years.
How do you like? What's the dividing line? Where do you draw the line when it comes to this thing's okay to share, this thing's not okay to share?
It's a good question on social, right? Because like everything feels like an open book. Like, listen, you see what I want you to see. Like that's the side of it. So anyone who thinks that someone's totally opening up their full story to everyone, like there's things that are sacred. And it's funny because when I started this journey, my now husband sat down and we had a conversation because he was like, I'm really uncomfortable with this. Like, I'm really private. I'm uncomfortable with you sharing and being so open. And we had to work through that and talk about like, okay, what's okay to share, what's not okay to share. And one hard rule, I will never ever disparage or talk about anyone or talk about exes in any way or anything like that, because none of this story is actually about them. It's always about the growth that happens after that. My husband, who was so uncomfortable, now is just like, he's just totally accepted and adopted it and thinks it's a hoot. But so much of that still is like, I'm going to talk about my divorces. I'm going to talk about the hard. I'm going to talk about the pain and the growth from it and the pivot, and all of that. I'm not going to talk about everything, so there's still boundaries that I have. And I think that anyone who puts themselves out there in the podcast world or social media, like I think it's important to maintain that too, because we do see when people don't, what happens. And then we see that with even some influencers, right, who have like they've put everything out and then something happens in their life and people feel like they've been slighted because they weren't told part of their story, or a relationship fell apart and they weren't part of that, and then they're like blackballed from that world. So it's it's be vulnerable in a really authentic way, but I don't think you have to overshare either.
When you were working with this marketing company or the branding company, do they help you develop which stories that would be maybe have the most impact?
No. That was, yeah, so it was an exercise of, so one of the things that they do is when they help you craft a keynote. And as part of that process is to write down stories that were impactful to you that might fit into a keynote. And don't judge them. Just put it all down. Some of them might be relevant, some might be good, some might be funny, some might be painful. And then as you start to craft the outline of what your keynote, you go to this library of stories, and you can pick which ones are going to be applicable. And as I was working on my keynote, I knew I had the framework. I didn't know what story I was going to tell, and actually the one that I pulled out to tell was the one that I never thought in a million years I would ever speak on stage. And the first time I ever did, I'm like, I can't believe I'm going up there to do this. And every time before I speak, I say the same thing. I'm like, I can't believe I'm going to share this story, and maybe I should change it. And my husband always says, you cannot change this story. You have to tell it just the way it is. And I never regret it, because sometimes I'm like, it might not be appropriate for the corporate audience or whatever, but it's like that fit. So they were my true stories. I curated a library of them, and then when I was writing my book, I was able to go back into there and decide which other stories would fit into that. So they really didn't help pull out the stories. They just encourage you to use your own personal stories in order to really lock that keynote in and connect with people on a really authentic way. Because you could just go in there and teach a framework and everyone's going to go like yawn, like, okay, I'm not going to remember a damn thing from that. But when you start saying something to somebody and you see them crying, or you see then you know you're making a connection, and that's the thing that people remember, is how you made them feel.